Two men have been jailed for their involvement in the plot to manufacture and supply firearms, which were made at home using a 3D printer. Sabucio Moyo and Christopher Gill were convicted of the charges in what is thought to be the fourth prosecution of its kind. Police found the homemade guns alongside bullets and other gun-making equipment in the raids at addresses in Bradford and Hull, where the weapons were manufactured on a kitchen worktop and a domestic garage. The weapons, described as a hybrid 3D printing gun with metal parts, were destined to be used in organised crime. Officers stopped Bradford man Majid Rehman, an associate of the pair, in his BMW car on the 17th of May last year. A search of the vehicle found an FG C9 homemade automatic submachine gun, magazine and bullets hidden in a supermarket bag for life in the rear footwell of the car. They had earlier seen a man, later identified as Gill, get into the BMW while carrying the bag. Further investigations led the Yorkshire and Humber Regional Organised Crime Unit (YHROCU) found two further almost complete FG C9s in a holdall hidden Gill's loft. Mr. Moyo was later arrested, and the evidence obtained that he had been manufacturing FGC9s at his home address in Hull, where he had obtained two 3D printers and other component parts to make the weapons. They also found a range of other tools and parts, including springs and screws, that could be used to make the guns as instructed in an online manual. Evidence also included videos and pictures of firearms at various stages of construction. These images were taken in residential premises, which included Mr. Mayo's kitchen and garage, as well as Mr. Gill's home address. Mr. Mayo's DNA was also found on the weapons taken from the BMW. The court heard that forensic firearms experts based at the Royal Armouries in Leeds had tested the seized items and confirmed that they were viable firearms. Appearing before Sheffield Crown Court for sentencing, Mr. Mayo, aged 41, of Eleanor Grove Hall, was found guilty of illegally manufacturing a firearm and a separate identity fraud offence following a trial, and he was jailed for 18 years. Mr. Gill of Dick Lane, Terrassel, Bradford, was found guilty of illegally manufacturing a firearm and was jailed for 13 years and 8 months. Mr. Raymond, 46, of Central Avenue, Littlehorn, Bradford, was found guilty of possession of ammunition and conspiracy to transfer a prohibited firearm, and he will be sentenced at a later date. Speaking after sentencing, Senior Investigating Officer Detective Chief Inspector Andrew Howard of the Yorkshire and Humber Regional Organised Crime Unit said, "Over recent times we have seen the tragic and devastating consequences that criminally held firearms being used by offenders have caused. These include the fatal shootings of innocent people and the shattering of lives of those close to them, not to mention the impact such incidents have had on our communities. Today, two men who were involved in the manufacture, supply and distribution of privately manufactured 3D printed automatic weapons have received significant sentences for their roles. Our investigations found that Mr. Mayo and Mr. Gill followed detailed instructions and systematically bought items to manufacture and construct these deadly firearms and ammunition. They demonstrated levels of sophistication in the manufacture process and successfully produced viable firearms. Majid Rehman, a close criminal associate, was found guilty of distributing one viable FG-C9, a 3D printed firearm with ammunition clips containing 8 live rounds of ammunition. The manufacture of viable 3D printed firearms is a real threat, and these firearms were built for only one purpose: to be supplied to other organised criminals who would use them to inflict harm. This has been a groundbreaking, complex investigation supported by the National Crime Agency into the new threat posed by 3D printed guns. I would like to pay tribute to the team of officers and staff who have shown the tenacity and determination in successfully bringing this case to trial. Their professionalism has been recognised by the courts today. These are officers that put themselves in harm's way on a daily basis to protect our communities from dangerous offenders armed with weapons. The Yorkshire and Humber Regional Organised Crime Unit welcome the sentences imposed by the court today. We are determined to keep the public safe by tackling those that chose to manufacture these lethal weapons. Those that do this will be hunted down, and they will feel the full weight of the law and should expect to see very lengthy sentences. instances. Matt Perfett, the operations manager at the National Crime Agency's National Firearm Targeting Center, said, "The NCA's National Firearms Targeting Center coordinates the national intelligence picture on firearms and played a key and decisive role in this investigation, working alongside the YHROCU. This organised crime gang was the first in the UK to be convicted of trying to supply other criminals with 3D printed firearms. Gun crime in the UK continues to be relatively low compared to mainland Europe and is amongst the lowest in the world. However, demand for firearms in the criminal market continues. Suppressing their availability is therefore a national priority for the NCA and UK law enforcement. The NCA works closely with our policing partners at home and abroad to target criminals with using firearms and to cut off the supply routes into the country as well as the distribution within it." Two men who pocketed hundreds of thousands of pounds from a 3.9 million Ponzi scam have been jailed. Ex-Spalding United chairman Christopher Toyton and Ross Gibson tricked hundreds of people into investing into the Lottery Syndicate Club. Between them, they spent more than £500,000 on holidays, cars and watches, while much of the remaining money was lost when the scheme collapsed. Both men were jailed at Lincoln Crown Court. The scheme operated between 2017 and 2019 when an investigation was launched by the police following complaints of a suspected fraud. Mr. Toyton acted as the sole director while Mr. Gibson, despite his lack of professional experience or qualifications in financial investment or market trading, was appointed the scheme's trader. The court heard the men convinced several hundred people from across the country, including Lincolnshire and Cornwall, to invest in the scheme, telling them that it was legitimate and their investments were safe and that it was a low risk. Ponzi scams, named after the fraudster Charles Ponzi, offers investors high returns on their money, but those returns are in fact paid for with other later investors' own deposits into the scheme. Lincolnshire police said when the scheme collapsed in 2019, it was discovered that Mr. Toynton had spent £134,000 of investors' money on luxury cars and holidays, whilst Mr. Gibson spent £400,000 on holidays and designer watches. Mr. Toynton, who was 73 of Horseshoe Road, Spalding, was found guilty on 4 charges of fraud by false representation and 5 charges of fraud by abuse of position and jailed for 4 years and 6 months. The jury was directed to clear Mr. Toyton of a regulatory offence after the trial judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence to conclude that he was acting as an agent or offering financial advice. He was also cleared of 1 charge of fraud by false representation. Mr. Gibson, who was 27 of Eve Lane, Upper Cornwall, Dudley, pleaded guilty to fraud by abuse of position, carrying out regulated activities, and fraud by false representation, and he was jailed for 4 years and 5 months. A gang who supplied golden ticket falsified passports to fugitive criminals, including murderers and drug dealers, has also been jailed. Anthony Beard, who paid vulnerable people for their expired passports so he could apply for renewals using their names but criminals' photos, was sentenced to 6 years and 8 months at Reading Crown Court. He was jailed after admitting conspiracy to pervert the course of justice and conspiracy to make false instrument with intent. Another 74 offences linked to fraudulent passport applications were taken into consideration. High-level criminals paid up to £20,000 for the fraudulently obtained genuine FOG passports that enabled them to go on the run and start new lives abroad in countries including Spain, Portugal and cities such as Dubai. Mr. Beard, who was 61 from Sydenham, South East London, put contact numbers of his own burner phones on official forums and countersigned some of them himself as he shepherded more than 100 fraudulent applications through the completion. He would find people with similar facial features to his criminal clients and pay them to donate their expired passports, with other contacts pretending to be professionals to vouch that the criminal photos were genuine. Evidence of his offering went back to 2007, but Mr. Bird was heard bragging that he had operated the scam for 20 years. In 2019, he began working with Christopher Zetek, a broker who represented a Glaswegian crime gang allegedly run by 2 brothers called James and Barry Gillespie, and a man described both as Zetek's trusted lieutenant but also his dog's body, Alan Thompson. Mr. Zetek, who was 67, who had homes in Sydenham, Ireland and Spain, was jailed for 8 years for conspiracy to avert the course of justice, conspiracy to make false instrument with intent, and converting criminal property. Mr. Thompson, who was 72, from Sutton in Surrey, was sentenced to 3 years for the same offences. Both men were found guilty on March the 17th after a trial. Passing sentence. Deputy Circuit Judge Nicholas Ainley said of the scheme, "It was to enable very wicked, sophisticated, violent criminals to escape justice by providing them with documents that, because they were genuine, would deceive the authorities and enable them to escape." He said that Mr. Zetek was clearly the organiser, providing a link to serious criminals, while Mr. Beard was the legman and Mr. Thompson had a lesser role. Mr. Zetek, formerly known as Christopher McCormack, was also once an enforcer for North London crime group the Adams Family, investigators believe. Lawyers for the trio pointed at their age and various health problems for mitigation. Craig Rush, for Mr. Thompson, said he had been forced to retire on medical grounds in 1999, and by 2017 was so bored that he was driven to crime. Describing Mr. Thompson meeting Mr. Zetek, he said, "These days from 1999 to 2017 or 18, watching Homes Under the Hammer, daytime TV, totally bogged down in a world of boredom, were lightened by a man who could spin an interesting story." Mr. Thompson had become a gopher for Mr. Zetek, not for money, but because it gave him something to do, Mr. Rush told the court. Investigators from the National Crime Agency believe Mr. Beard was responsible for at least 108 fraudulently obtained genuine passports being issued, with several more unsuccessful applications being made. The passports enabled serious criminals to go on the run from the UK and start a new life abroad, remaining undetected even if they had a brush in with the law under their fake name. Craig Turner, the NCA Deputy Director of Investigation, said this was the golden ticket for the organised crime networks in order that they could evade arrest, evade identification by local law enforcement, either internationally or at home in the UK. Once the passport scam was uncovered, the fake identities of around 50 fugitives were discovered and they were arrested. Their trial focused on 12 passports that were obtained for customers, including Glasgow murderer Jordan Owen and Christopher Hughes, Liverpool drug trafficker Michael Mugan, Manchester fugitive David Wally, and suspected Scottish drug traffickers Barry Gillespie, Jamie Stevenson and James White. Mr. Beard also obtained fake passports for Stephen Lawrence murder suspect Jamie Alcott, Irish drug kingpin Christy Kinahan Sr. and firearms trafficker Richard Burdett, although these are not part of the trial. Mr. Alcott spent more than 2 years on the run using the name Simon Alfonso, having been accused of leading a £3 million drug smuggling plot. He was arrested in Barcelona in Spain 2018 after being spotted in surveillance footage of an associate of Mr. Beard by NCA investigators. He was later jailed for 9 years for the plan that moved around 750 kilograms of cannabis. The fake passport was obtained by him by Mr. Beard but ultimately never reached Mr. Alcott. The NCA said it now plans to make an application to recover proceeds of crime from